Last night was the kickoff to the NFL season, so as a NASCAR fan, I obviously need to somehow draw a connection between the two leagues that makes no sense whatsoever. So, this is how each NFL team is like a certain driver, team, car owner, or any other entity in the sport. So starting off, we're going to look at the AFC teams. We're going to start off with the defending Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, and their equivalent in NASCAR would be Brad Keselowski. BK is a driver that wins in flash, and he wins often like Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs do. He also brought Roger Penske his first championship in NASCAR, just like the Chiefs did for Andy Reid. Next up is the Denver Broncos, and the Broncos are definitely Richard Childress racing. RCR is similar to the Denver Broncos in major ways, but the biggest is that their star players are pretty much the only major highlights in their franchise's history. For the Broncos, it was John Elway and Peyton Manning. For RCR, it was Dale Earnhardt and Kevin Harvick. Hell, Earnhardt and Elway actually won the 500 in Super Bowl after breaking droughts in 1998. Ever since then, both have been mid-pack, RCR and Denver, that is. The Las Vegas Raiders have a bit more excitement to their NASCAR doppelganger, and it's Jimmy Spencer, Mr. Excitement. Spencer was definitely a fun driver to watch, but not as much a successful driver. Kind of like the Raiders in the past, 30 years. Ever since the 70s, the Raiders have been entertaining, but more often than not, it's because their fans shank opponents' fans. The Los Angeles Chargers now are similar to the Brickyard 400. None of the home fans ever show up. Moving on. Heading north, we're going to look at the Baltimore Ravens, which to me are like Kurt Busch. Busch and the Ravens are really good early on in their career, and they won it all. But ever since, they have been underrated no matter how good they are. They're basically contenders every year, but can always fall between the cracks. Next up, we'll talk championships with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who, in my opinion, are the equivalent to Dale Earnhardt. Both had uniforms in black, both have tied the lead of most title wins in their respective sport, both have hard-knock strategies, and both have fans that can be unbearable at times on social media. From one old-school team to another, we're going to go to the Cleveland Browns. While a laughingstock today, the Browns were at one time the most feared team in the NFL and in football in general. In racing, the same can be said for Richard Petty. Petty won 7 championships, but since the 80s has been slowly but surely going down when it comes to performance with his team. So, Petty and Cleveland have the possibility of a bright future right now, but, it's Cleveland. What can you say? Next up is the Bengals, aka the Bungles, and aka Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Stenhouse and the Bungles have both shown flashes of brilliance, but can never be underestimated when it comes to their ability to crash it up. Down south, we're going to look at the Houston Texans. For this newer team, I'm choosing a newer driver, Eric Jones. Jones is a relatively new driver that has a ton of potential, but still hasn't shown it yet, just like the Texans. Next up, there's the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee is a team that has struggled in its past only to raise itself up. And this to me sounds like the careers of both Ryan Tannehill and NASCAR driver Aric Almirola. Only time will tell if the Titans or Almirola can take the next step to win it all. These questions at a younger level can be asked of the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jags are a young franchise that has had very few bright moments. But when they're good, they're good. And this is definitely what we see with William Byron. Byron has struggled in his early brief Cup career, but he has shown a bit of an upside, scoring his first win recently in the Crunch. Now, a team that is nowhere near new and does not lack any winning history is the Indianapolis Colts. And to me, the driver that really represents the Colts would be Clint Bowyer. Both are generally known for their successes, but are a little bit closer to the middle of the pack than a lot of people would like to admit. Now, for the Bills, you can't really say that they're exactly horrible, but generally they're never great, even good. So I thought, who would be the definition of perfectly adequate? Paul Menard. It just feels right to say Paul Menard is the Buffalo Bills of NASCAR. Now, a team that has been fading over time is the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins used to be a force to be reckoned with, and now they're just background noise. And this is exactly what happened to Darrell Waltrip towards the end of his career. After a legendary run, he faded into the pack. Pack that was accompanied by a bunch of butt fumbles. Of course, this is a synonym for the New York Jets. And if I had to pick one driver to describe their career so far as a butt fumble, then I'd say that driver would be Natalie Decker. Crashing off of a record truck is NASCAR's version of a butt fumble. One who wouldn't be a butt fumble, though, is the New England Patriot. It's the evil empire. I don't see how anyone could say that this team isn't just like Jimmy Johnson. Both were dominant as hell, and both defined the last 20 years of each of their respective sports. So, that's the AFC. But what about the NFC? How do they stack up? Let's start off with the biggest story of the 2020 NFL season with the Buccaneers. I think that this team would be Michael Waltrip Racing. MWR was a team that seemed to have everything going for them. Will Tampa Bay have the same fate? Will they be the 2012 Michael Waltrip Racing or the Spingate Michael Waltrip Racing that led to inevitable disaster? Only time will tell. For the Atlanta Falcons, choking is the name of the game. 28-3, you know? So what NASCAR driver has problems like this? Well, I'd say a driver that really represents this Georgia team is a Georgia native with Chase Elliott. A driver with tons of talent, but for some reason, in many instances, can just not close out the deal. It's not a knock against him, really. It's just stuff happens. His buddy Ryan Blaney, in my opinion, would end up being the Carolina Panthers. They're relatively new, but have not reached the full potential of their team by any means. And this is how I see Ryan Blaney. Now, the rival to all of these is the New Orleans Saints. The Saints, to me, are Kyle Busch. Busch is quite a divisive driver, to say the least. And after the Bounty Gate, so too are the New Orleans Saints. Quite a large amount of NASCAR fans hate Busch, while huge amounts of NFL fans hate the Saints. Both are consistently winners, though, so that's how they really are similar. Next up are the defending Super Bowl losers, the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners might have lost the big game last year, but overall, they're one of the most successful championship-winning teams in NFL history, especially in the two eras with Joe Montana and Steve Young. Now, the same can be said for Tony Stewart, who raced for Joe Gibbs Racing and his own team, Stewart Haas Racing, where he won 3 championships and had tons of wins. Next up are the Los Angeles Rams, a team that was once lovable losers, but now really are the most disliked team in the league for a lot of people. Once they got the taste of winning, it just all changed. There's one driver who has went through this exact same process at roughly around the same time in history, actually, that I can think of for this. Martin Truex Jr. Truex ran for both DEI and MWR from 2005 to 2013 and only won twice. But once he jumped with Furniture Row and then eventually JGR, his career shot off like a rocket. In this time, people have went from loving him for basically pity, and now they're just hating him, seemingly on his weekly winning basis. Now, a team that rarely wins is the Arizona Cardinals. Statistically, they're actually the worst team in NFL history. And aside from a few flare-ups, they're generally a terrible team. My comparison to them is NASCAR driver Michael Waltrip. Now, this isn't a knock on Waltrip. I do think he has a lot of talent. But the younger Waltrip was mostly winless through his career until the brief DEI plate success that he had. And that's what he's known for. And that's why, in my opinion, he's NASCAR's Arizona Cardinals. A big-time team in the last decade would be the Seattle Seahawks. And the Seahawks have been a winning team with a winning culture under the leadership of Pete Carroll. And while this is going to seem weird with Joe Gibbs' history in the NFL and leadership, I say that JGR is really equivalent to Seattle. A team full of talent that will always have a chance to win no matter if they're on a slump or not. Another popular team that I think has a NASCAR parallel is the Dallas Cowboys. This team, to me, compares well to Jeff Gordon. Gordon is like the Cowboys in the sense that his biggest successes were in the 90s, but they have still had successes and been contenders since then, but they're nowhere near where they were. A team that hasn't been a contender is the Washington Redskins or Washington Football Team or Washington, D.C. in general, or whoever you're calling them. Ray Ciccarelli. That's it. That's the doppelganger. So the Eagles. Who would be the Eagles? Well, I, for one, am saying that it's going to be Kevin Harvick. Harvick is a driver that you just don't mess with, much like Philadelphia crowds. He will start a fight, much like Philadelphia crowds, and the team is generally up front in the NFL with Philadelphia, as is Kevin Harvick. Even with all this success that they have, though, both have only one title apiece. Now, a team that has won more than one title apiece is the New York Giants. And to me, the New York Giants actually is going to be Joey Logano. Logano is a driver who, while good, has had quite inconsistent runs in his career. So, he's much like the Giants. When push comes to shove, though, he's going to be there in the crunch like Eli Manning versus the Patriots. Now, we enter the final division, the NFC North, starting with the Detroit Lions. The Lions have been a forgettable franchise since the 1950s, being dominated by the three other NFC North teams. This reminds me of Casey Mears, who was always overshadowed no matter where he was or who he was racing against. Look at him at his HMS time, and look at him against guys like Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon, and Dale Jr. Their popularity would just overshadow him immediately. Now, one of the teams that really beats up on Detroit on a yearly basis is the Chicago Bears. The Bears are a long-lasting franchise that has had sporadic success, and to me, this is Casey Kane. Kane can get it done when he has everything behind him, but it can get a bit overblown by the media, similar to what Chicago media does with the Bears. What's funny, though, is that both of them were insanely good in 2006. Casey Kane got 6 wins, and that was the best of his career. The Bears ended up making the Super Bowl with 13 wins, dominating the NFC that year. So, there's a lot of similarities. Now, the Bears' rival in the Green Bay Packers surely is Rick Henry, simply for this question. How? How in the hell did he get 2 generational talent on their teams? Look at the Packers. They got Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers back to back. And then look at Hendrick. He got Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson back to back. That's a parallel right there. These athletes all helped define their sports leagues for the last 30 years in both NASCAR racing and NFL football alike. And thus leads us to the best team. Last but not least, my favorite NFL team, the Minnesota Vikings. And the Vikings are clearly Mark Martin. Both the Vikings and Martin are the textbook definitions of heartbreak in sports. You look at Martin's championship losses. You look at the Vikings losing 4 Super Bowls. The championship games they lost. After going 15-1 in 98, they miss on a field goal. You look at 2009, a magical season with Brett Favre. And then they go and screw it up and lose in overtime to the Saints. 41 donut. You look at 38-7. I'm going to get lost in my heartbreak as a Vikings fan here. But you look at Martin with the 2007 Daytona 500. You look at all of these things added up, and you look at how close they all were. The fact that they are the best, more than likely, in their respective leagues to never win it all. These two have to be a pairing here. But that's all of it from me. I want to hear from you. Who are your comparisons? Let me know in the comments down below. Who would you pick? And while you're doing that, leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. And until next time, have a good one.